Hey guys, welcome back to Day 5 of American History 1, Unit 2. So we last left off right after the Battle of Bunker Hill and after the Second Continental Congress. By this time, more and more people have gotten comfortable with the idea of independence. There are obviously still a ton of loyalists in the colonies, but more people are starting to see sort of what Thomas Paine's arguments were in common sense. They're starting to see the logic behind independence and how it's clear that the relationship between the colonies and the British government will never be one that the colonies are happy with. So on April 12th of 1776, the delegates from North Carolina officially began to seek separation from Great Britain. So if you ever see the new North Carolina license plates, they say first in freedom. That's because North Carolina was actually the first colony to formally seek independence away from Great Britain. So after North Carolina took that first step in April, over the next month or so, more and more delegates started to discuss, is this the right move? Should we all be doing this? So on June 7th, the delegate who was sort of the head delegate for Virginia, Richard Henry Lee, who was a big player in all of this. Virginia is probably the most important colony, aside from Massachusetts. Those are really the two most important. Virginia is the oldest colony. And so he basically decided that it probably was best that all of the colonies seek separation. So on June 7th of 1776, he put forward a resolution to officially seek separation from Great Britain for all of the 13 colonies. John Adams seconded that resolution and got up and gave a huge speech where he basically said, if we don't hang together, we're going to hang separately. And what he means is if we don't stick together here in this moment and remain, a united group, then we're all going to end up dead. So Thomas Jefferson, he said, the question was not whether by a Declaration of Independence we should make ourselves what we are not, but whether we should declare a fact that already exists. Basically saying we are already functioning like an independent government. We already function as an independent economy. We already govern ourselves. Are we brave enough and capable of taking that on and recognizing that and demanding that, we maintain that? Or are we just going to pretend that it isn't the current situation that we're in? So the resolution passes, and they form a committee to write up a justification for this resolution for when Congress formally accepts it. They put together this 5-man committee, but only 3 of them you need to know. Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and John Adams. Those are the 3 main dudes on the committee, and it's their job to write an explanation. Why are we declaring our independence? What are our reasons? So, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams basically get with Thomas Jefferson and they're like, hey, TJ, you're such a great writer. You have the best language and handwriting. You should just do this. And then, we'll edit it and just make sure it's good to go. So they give it to Thomas Jefferson to really do by himself. And what he writes is obviously the Declaration of Independence. Now, the version that you know today is not the original version. His original version had a couple of things in there that John Adams and Benjamin Franklin took out. Like he had some pieces in there about slavery, about how maybe it should not exist. But John Adams and Ben Franklin, both of which were against slavery, thought that it might alienate other colonies and that was not the place to write that in. They weren't ready to take that step. It's sort of ironic considering the man who wrote that in there, Thomas Jefferson, owned slaves. But nevertheless, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams made a few changes, a few edits, and On July 2nd, they passed the resolution, and on the 4th of July, they sign in the Declaration of Independence with the members of the Continental Congress, 55 men, including the president of the Continental Congress, who was John Hancock. And he's very famous for having that sort of flowery, beautiful signature right there at the top in the middle. So now that we've declared our independence, and the war has already begun, it is more important than ever that we take this seriously and that we're able to come out on top. We have more on the line now than ever before. Now that we've declared independence, if we lose the war, every man who signed their name to that document is guilty of treason and they'll be hung. So, it's very important that we come out with the right outcome. So let's look at the difference here between the Redcoats and the Continental Army, two very different ones. Who's the underdog here? Obviously the Continentals. So the Redcoats have much more experience in battle. They have a huge military advantage. They, have just a larger army. They also have a navy. We don't have a navy at all. They have a navy. It's not at its best because it just got done fighting in the 7 Years' War, but it's a navy nonetheless. They have great financial backing. They might be in debt, but they do have the ability to pay for their military, fund the supplies, hire more people, things like that. And they also have German help. They've hired some Hessians as sort of like guns for hire, some German people to come over and sort of serve as their temporary soldiers as well. Now, a disadvantage that they have would be that those German soldiers have no loyalty to them. They're only fighting for a paycheck. But nevertheless, that's not necessarily a huge disadvantage. The Continental Army, on the other side of this, only has about 19,000 soldiers. The British military is significantly larger, and it's sort of infinite, like they can always recruit more and send more. We will eventually run out of people. Our military also has very little experience. Our soldiers have essentially no experience. Our generals have very little experience. We have no navy. We have only an army. We have no money for military equipment. You already saw that coming back to bite us in the butt at the Battle of Bunker Hill when we ran out of gunpowder. But one advantage we do have is that our motivation for fighting the war is so much stronger than any of these redcoats. Sure, they want to put down the rebellion and win the war, but they don't feel like they're fighting for their families. They're not fighting to protect their loved ones against an invader. And that is the motivation that our Continental soldiers have. They're fighting for their homes, their futures, their children, and that means so much more to them. And that might not seem like an important thing, but I promise you it really, really is. In battle, you have to have your soldiers' heads in the game and hearts in the game to do well. Without that, it's really not you won't be as successful by any means. Another advantage the Continental Army has is the home field advantage. They're playing this game in a field that they know very well. That they know the terrain. They know good places to get a military advantage. They know where you can get some higher ground. They know the quickest route to get to all of these different places. The British Army doesn't have all of those, small facets of knowledge. And so that is something that will come as an advantage to our military. So pretty quickly in the war, I told you we're not going to be doing well. We may have won the Battle of Lexington and Concord, but in 1776, once we declare our independence, Great Britain will up their game as well. In July, right after the Declaration of Independence is passed, General William Howe, who will eventually become the new commander of British forces, he and his men are sent in as reinforcements to New York. And he comes in with 30,000 soldiers. Remember, there are only 19,000 Continentals total. He alone is coming in with 30,000 soldiers, and he is going to capture New York very quickly. The strategy of the British was to capture the important cities, while the strategy of the Continentals, the new Americans, is to hold on to the more rural areas. And it's just sort of like a time game whose strategy is going to prove to be the more successful one. So he's going to go after the island of Manhattan, and he's going to invade first, at Kips Bay, which is in Manhattan, and then after the Continentals, I'm sorry, they're not Continentals anymore, they're Americans. After the Americans abandon Kips Bay in Manhattan, they're going to pull back to Long Island, and then he will defeat General Washington and his men on Long Island as well. So things are just really going from bad to worse. There are plenty of people who are trying their best to resist, like average citizens who live in New York who are trying to fight the British soldiers with the American military, but it's not necessarily working. So aside from the actual war and battle against the military that is one of the greatest in the world that's so hard, our physical environment is a very difficult one. We are going to experience one of the coldest and harshest winters in the north of the United States that we've ever seen before, and especially in northern Virginia up. That's really where we see the most of it. We're going to see heavy, heavy snowfall. It's going to be a long winter. And Washington's army is just really falling apart. He was getting a lot of criticism. People were saying he wasn't a good military leader because he was losing. His men start deserting. They start leaving their base at Valley Forge in Virginia. And a lot of people start thinking it's a lost cause. They are living in huts and like makeshift tents because they don't have enough supplies to get real tents. Food supplies are low. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One is inflation. The economy is sort of in a bit of a tailspin while all of this is going on. And the second reason is that a lot of farmers had agreed to only trade with Great Britain. Great Britain had said, if you only sell your food to us, we'll pay you more. And because of that, a lot of farmers, they couldn't say no to the money. So now there are a lot of farmers who won't even sell food to the American military. So there is food for them to eat, but they can't get a hold of it. And then the food that they can get, we can't necessarily afford because prices have risen and we have so little money. So a lot of our soldiers are going to go malnourished. We're going to see a lot of disease and stuff coming from coal and malnutrition. Thousands of soldiers are going to die from that winter in Valley Forge. It's going to be an extremely terrible time. And everyone is starting to feel like this is useless. Washington doesn't know what he's doing. He's frustrated because Congress can't give him what he needs. They've only given him a third of the men they promised. They've given him a small fraction of the supplies that they've promised. Regular people are just seeing, continuous losses and soldiers dying and land, being lost to the British military. And they're thinking, why did we do this in the first place? Maybe this wasn't the right move. So the American military is going to need a significant win to help get us back on track. And we will talk about that win in the next video.